So there's a really fun game. Many of you have played it, especially when you're sitting around a fire at night or you're driving in a car, and it's called Would You Rather. Those of you know it, usually Would You Rather is inspired by a bad thing. Like you say, oh, would you rather have this horrible thing happen to you or this horrible thing happen to you? I'm going to play it a little bit differently. I'm going to do two positives, okay? Would you rather be saved and see God's deliverance as the Red Sea split, leaving dry ground, or by a Christian brother coming up to you or sister and saying, hey, I've been praying for you that you might be able to escape this temptation? Which would you rather have? Think about it. Or, in a dangerous situation, would you rather have an angel of light appear, fly down, and lift you up from a cliff, or a random stranger happenstance come along and see you dangling and be able to pull you free from it? These are the differences between the miraculous and the providential. Miraculous things are amazing because God breaks the rules of reality. The laws of physics don't apply to miracles. You can maybe say, okay, particularly, why did the Red Sea dry up? And people have these arguments, but the fact is, even if water stops, water doesn't turn, or mud doesn't turn to dry ground instantly. That is a miracle. Providence, though, is also incredibly amazing because it means that God directs the natural order of things to fulfill his perfect plan. God is in control of that. And so Paul, writing God-breathed scripture in a prison in Rome, is just as miraculous as God inscribing the Ten Commandments in stone and giving them to Moses. And which does Jesus say is actually better? And another would you rather. Would you rather see Jesus in person or read about him in your Bible? I contest probably most of us would say, absolutely Jesus in person, but what did Jesus tell Thomas? In John 20, verse 27, he said, see my hands and reaching my hands and putting your side, do not be unbelieving, but believing. Thomas answered and said to him, my Lord and my God. He saw Jesus. But Jesus said, because you have seen me, have you believed? Blessed are those who do not see and yet believe. John 20:29. A state of blessing exists. Or in John 16, Jesus said, it's your advantage I go away, then the helper will come to you. If I go away, I will send him to you. If you haven't already opened your Bibles to the book of Esther, please do so. We're going to be spending the next few months looking at the book of Esther, which is, from all accounts, highly contentious, even within the church, over whether it even is scripture and what the point of it is supposed to be. And one big thing you'll see throughout this book is the unseen hand of God. Yes, I said we will see the unseen hand of God, because God's promises are working. And I'm going to try and bring out to you guys as we work through this that we live more in the times of Esther than we live in the times of the Exodus. This is going to be our lives. And so we have to see how God is working here so that we might see how God is working in our lives as well, not just through the miraculous, but the providential. Now, I want you guys to put your time machine caps on for a second and think as we travel back in time, because this is true history. The Bible is always true history, and I want to review and help you with a little chart again of the history of the Old Testament. So you will recall that the Jews are the children of Abraham, who will be mentioned in this book, and all of this started way back with Adam and Eve. And Adam and Eve lived in perfection. But did they stay perfect? No. They sinned. And so the snake crusher, the promise was given to them that from Eve's seed would come the one who would crush the snake and solve the problems. Or as Paul called him, the second Adam would one day come. And so the whole issue is figuring out who is this second Adam who is going to solve the issues. And we quickly see after Adam and Eve, things get bad fast. So bad that God destroys the whole world, but he makes a promise to Noah, the Noahic covenant, saying, I will not destroy the world again. It's going to be preserved until I come back. So, story continues, and we start to figure out which family this seed comes from. From this guy named Abram, who's called from a foreign land to come and live in the promised land. And we get the Abrahamic covenant, that through him all the world will be blessed. But that family goes into Egypt, and they're in this time of Egypt as made into slaves. The Exodus occurs. God miraculously saves them. They go and they hear his word, and he gives them the Mosaic or the Sinaitic covenant. Says, if you do these good things, you'll be blessed. If you do these bad things, you'll be cursed. How well does that go? Horribly. They fail again and again. And the cycle continues until a man named David comes about. A man after God's own heart, right? Who seems to be the one who is going to solve everything. And he wants to build a temple to God, but God instead says, I'm making a promise to you. I'm going to give you the Davidic covenant. I'm going to build you a house, and there will be a king who will come from you, who will rule forever. One more time though. How well does that go? David sins. Solomon sins. And we see all the sons continue to sin until we got to Jehoiakim under Habakkuk. And we just finished Habakkuk. And what happens to the people after Habakkuk prophesies? There is great evil in Israel, so God says exile is coming, like you were promised. But even as this promise of exile, God says, I have something better coming, the new covenant, which we'll look at many times, how God will write upon their hearts his law. But they still go into exile. Yet in 539 BC, King Cyrus defeats Babylon. He sends Israel back, and 42,000 Israelites go back to Jerusalem. And in 510, the temple is rebuilt. But even though 42,000 went back, there's still a lot of people who remain in exile, who remain in these foreign nations. We're going to talk about why as we go along. And that gives us the story of Esther and Mordecai. This book happens after God's promises have been given, and yet not everyone is taking advantage of those promises. Now, as we walk through this book, I'm going to give you ahead of time what are considered the two main purposes of the book of Esther. First off is to describe where the Feast of Purim came from. I love this chart. It's so helpful because it shows where all the feasts of the Bible are in time. And you can see as of this year, March 13th, 2025 was Purim. And a professor down at Masters named William Varner, who I got to spend time in Israel with, he wonderfully described the Jewish feasts can be described this way. They tried to kill us, God delivered us, so let us eat. That's what every Jewish feast is, and that is what's reflected here in Purim. But as we walk through this book, I want you to try and think about something and notice a truth. Did the people of Israel deserve deliverance? Did they deserve to be saved by God? And the answer will be, I hope you will see, absolutely not. Because we will see the second purpose of this book is to reveal how when the children of Abraham are not faithful to God, he is faithful to them. God will deliver his people. It's fascinating. I know we have our order of the Bible. Many of you have memorized the order of the Bible that you have, and it seems kind of strange to have Ezra, Nehemiah, and then Esther at the end here. In fact, Esther should probably be right in the middle of it if you're going chronologically. But in the Jewish canon, they actually put put it between Lamentations and Daniel. And the last words of Lamentations in Lamentations 5 are, has God utterly rejected Israel? And then comes the book of Esther to show he has not. Then comes the book of Daniel to say, even in exile, God is speaking to his prophets. This is an encouraging book because it shows us in our lack of faithfulness how God will be faithful even though he lovingly disciplines us. So, we're going to read through Esther together. This is something I learned from a number of mentors over the year. We did it with Habakkuk. We did it with Esther. It takes a little longer for Esther, so I'm going to try and get through it. But I wanted to make it a little bit fun and traditional. Some of you who have known this, in Jewish families, as mine are, when the reading comes up, we do something. Because you have some good guys and some bad guys that are very clear in this book. When you hear the name Mordecai, I want you to say a little yay. So, Mordecai. Yay. When you hear the name Haman, I want you to hiss a little bit because he's the bad guy. So, Haman. Yes. There we go. So, we're going to walk through this book together and see how God saves his people despite their sins. Part 1. The rise of the queen. Look in your Bibles with me. Now it took place in the days of Ahasuerus, the Ahasuerus who reigned from India to Ethiopia over 120 provinces. In those days, as King Ahasuerus sat on the royal throne which was at the citadel in Susa, in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet to all the princes and attendants, the army officers of Persia and Media, the nobles and the princes of his provinces being in his presence. And he displayed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor of his great majesty for many days, 180 days. When these days were completed, the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days for all the people who were present at the citadel in Susa. From the greatest to the least, in the court of the garden of the king's palace, there were hangings of fine white and violet linen, held by cords of fine purple linen on silver rings and marble columns, and couches of gold and silver, and on the mosaic pavement, porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and precious stones. Drinks were served in golden vessels of various kinds, and the royal wine was plentiful according to the king's bounty. The drinking was done according to the law, and there was no compulsion, for so the king had given orders that each official of his household, that he should do according to the desires of each person. Queen Vashti also gave a banquet for the women in the palace which belonged to King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagatha, Zethar, Carcass, the 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus, to bring Vashti before the king with her royal crown, in order to display her beauty to the people and the princes, for she was beautiful. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command delivered by the eunuchs. Then the king became very angry, and his wrath burned within him. Then the king said to the wise men who understood the times, "It was the custom of the king so to speak before all who knew law and justice, and were close to him, Karshena, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsina, Mecuman, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, who had access to the king's presence and sat in the first place in the kingdom. According to the law, what is to be done with Queen Vashti, because she did not obey the king's command of King Ahasuerus delivered by the eunuchs in the presence of the king and the princes?" Mecuman said, "Queen Vashti has wronged not only the king, but all the princes and all the people who are in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the queen's conduct will become known to all the women, causing them to look with contempt on their husbands by saying, 'King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought to his presence, but she did not come.' This day the ladies of Persia and Media, who have heard of the queen's conduct, will speak in the same way to the king's princes, and there will be plenty of contempt and anger. If the king pleases, let a royal edict be issued by him, and let it be written by the laws of Persia and Media, so it cannot be repealed, that Vashti may no longer come into the presence of King Ahasuerus, and let the king give his royal position to another who is more worthy than she. When the king's edict will be heard throughout all his kingdom, great as it is, then all the women who give honor to their husbands, great and small." This word pleased the king and the princes, and the king did as Memucan proposed. So he sent letters to the king's provinces, to each province according to the script, and to each people according to their language, so that each man should be the master of his own house and the one who speaks in the language of his own people. You haven't had a chance to make any sounds yet. The first full chapter is just setting the scene, right? Here we go then. After these things, when the anger of King Ahasuerus had subsided, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. Then the king's attendants who served him said, "Let beautiful virgins be sought for the king. Let the king appoint overseers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that he may gather every beautiful young virgin to the citadel of Susa, to the harem, into the custody of Hegai, the king's eunuch, who will be in charge of the women, and let their cosmetics be given to them. Then let a young lady who pleases the king be brought in place of Vashti." And the matter pleased the king, and he did accordingly. Now, there was at the citadel in Susa a Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite, who had been taken into exile from Jerusalem with the captives who had been exiled with Jehoiakim, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had exiled. He was bringing up Hadassah, that is, Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had no father or mother. Now the young lady was beautiful, form and face, and when her father and her mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So, it came about when the command and decree of the king were heard, and many young ladies were gathered to the citadel of Susa under the custody of Hegai, that Esther was taken to the king's palace into the custody of Hegai, who was in charge of the women. Now the young lady pleased him and found favor with him, so he quickly provided with her cosmetics and food, gave her 7 choice maids from the king's palace, and transferred her and her maids to the best place in the harem. Esther did not make known her people or her kindred, for Mordecai had instructed her that she should not make them known. Every day Mordecai walked back and forth in the front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and how she fared. Now when the turn of each young lady came into King Ahasuerus, after the end of 12 months under the regulation for the women, for the days of their beautification were completed as follows. 6 months was oil of myrrh. 6 months was spices and cosmetics for the women. The young lady would go into the king in this way. Anything she desired was given to her to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening, she would go in, and in the morning, she would return to the second harem to the custody of Shahagagaz, the king's eunuch who was in charge of the concubines. She would not go again to the king unless the king delighted in her and she was summoned by name. Now, when the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihal, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his daughter, came to go into the king, she did not request anything except what Hegai, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the women, advised. And Esther found favor in the eyes of all who saw her. So Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus, to his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. And the king loved Esther more than all the women, and she found favor and kindness with him more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king gave a royal banquet, Esther's banquet, for all his princes and servants, and he made a holiday for the provinces and gave gifts according to the king's bounty. Esther is now queen. And so we get then to Act 2. The threat against God's promised people. God's promises to his people. The threat against God's promises to his people. When the virgins were gathered together the second time, then Mordecai was sitting at the gate. Esther had not yet made her kindred or known her kindred or her people, even as Mordecai had commanded her. for Esther did what Mordecai told her she had done when under her care. In those days, when Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's officials, from those who guarded the door, became angry and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. But the plot became known to Mordecai, and he told Queen Esther, and Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. Now when the plot was investigated and found to be so, they were both hanged on the gallows, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles of the king's presence. Now we get to our villain finally. Chapter 3. After these events, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him and established his authority over the princes who were with him. All the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed and paid homage to Haman, for so the king had commanded concerning him. But Mordecai neither bowed down nor paid homage. Then the king's servants who were at the gate said to Mordecai, "Why are you transgressing the king's commands?" Now it was when they had spoken daily to him, and he would not listen to them, that they told Haman to see whether Mordecai's reasons would stand, for he had told them that he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai neither bowed nor paid homage to him, Haman was filled with rage, but he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone. For when they told him that the people of Mordecai were, therefore, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, who were throughout the kingdom of Ahasuerus. In the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, that is Lot, was cast before Haman from the day to day and from month to month until the 12th month, that is the month of Adar. Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, "There is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from all the other peoples, and they do not observe the king's law, so it is not in the king's interest to let them remain. If it's pleasing to the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who carry on the king's business, to put into the king's treasuries." Then the king took the signet ring of his hand and gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. And the king said to Haman, "The silver is yours, the people also, to do with them as you please." Then the king's scribes were summoned on the 13th day of the first month. And it was written just as Haman commanded the king's satraps, to the governors who were each province, and to the princes of each people, and each province according to its script, each people according to its language, being written in the name of King Ahasuerus, and sealed with the king's signet ring. Letters were sent to the couriers in all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all the Jews, both young and old, women and children, in one day, the 13th day in the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to seize their possessions as plunder. And a copy of the edict was issued as law in every province and was published to all people, so they should be ready for this day. The couriers went out impelled by the king's command, while the decree was issued in the citadel in Susa. And while the king and Haman sat down to drink, the city of Susa was in confusion. When Mordecai learned all he had done, he tore his clothes, he put on sackcloth and ashes, and went into the midst of the city and wailed loudly and bitterly. He went as far as the king's gate, for no one was to enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. In each and every province where the command and decree of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting and weeping and wailing, and many lay on sackcloth and ashes. Then Esther's maidens and her eunuchs came and told them, and the queen writhed in great anguish, for she sent garments to clothe Mordecai, that he might remove his sackcloth from him, but he did not accept them. Then Esther summoned Hatath from the king's eunuchs, whom the king had appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai to learn what this was and why it was. So Hatath went to Mordecai to the city square in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him all that happened to him and the exact amount of money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasury in the destruction of the Jews. He also gave a copy of the text of the edict, which had been issued in Susa for their destruction, that he might show Esther and inform her, and in order to go to the king to implore his favor and plead with him for her people. Hatath came back and related Mordecai's words to Esther, and Esther spoke to Hatath and ordered him to reply to Mordecai. All the king's servants and all the people of the king's provinces know that any man or woman who comes to the king, to the inner court, who is not summoned, but has but one law, that he put to death, unless the king holds out his golden scepter so that he may live. And I have not been summoned to the king for these 30 days. They related these Esther's words to Mordecai. Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not imagine that in the king's place you may escape any more than all the Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this. Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go, assemble all the Jews who are in Susa, and fast for me, and do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maidens will fast in the same way, and thus will go into the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went away and did just as Esther had commanded him. The threat against God's promises to his people. Now, Act 3, the happenstance of deliverance. A number of things just happen to happen in Esther 5 through Esther 7. Now, it came about, or you could read that as, it just happened to be, on the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace in front of the king's room. And the king was sitting in his royal throne in the throne room opposite the entrance to the palace. When the king saw that Esther, the queen, standing in the court, she obtained favor in his sight. And the king extended to Esther the golden scepter which was in his hand. So Esther came and touched the top of the scepter. The king said to her, what is troubling you, Queen Esther? And what is your request? Even to half of the kingdom it shall be given to you. And Esther said, if it pleases the king, may the king and Haman come to this day to the banquet I have prepared for him. Then the king said, bring Haman quickly, that we may do as Esther desires. So the king and Haman came to the banquet which Esther had prepared. As they drank their wine at the king's banquet, the king said to Esther, what is your petition? For it shall be granted to you. And what is your request? Even to half the kingdom it shall be done. So Esther replied, my petition and request is, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition, and to do what I request, may the king and Haman come to the banquet which I prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king says. Then Haman went out the day glad and pleased of heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, and he did not stand up or tremble before him, Haman was filled with anger against Mordecai. Haman controlled himself, however, went to his house and sent for his friends and his wife Zeresh. Then Haman recounted to them the glory of his riches, the number of his sons, every instance where the king had magnified him, and how he promoted him above all the princes and all the servants of the king. Haman also said, even Esther the queen, let no one but me come with the king to the banquet which she had prepared, and tomorrow I am invited by her with the king. Yet all of this does not satisfy me every time I see Mordecai, the Jew, sitting at the king's gate. Then Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends said to him, have the gallows 50 cubits high made. In the morning ask the king to have Mordecai hanged on it. Then joyfully go with the king to the banquet. And this advice pleased Haman. And so he had the gallows made. During that night, the king could not sleep. So he gave an order to bring the book of records, the chronicles, and they were read before the king. Maybe it helped him fall asleep. You read, boring records when you want to fall asleep. And it just happened, it was found that Mordecai had reported concerning Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who were doorkeepers, that they had sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. The king said, "What honor or dignity has been bestowed on Mordecai for this?" And the king's servants returned and said, "Nothing has been done for him." So the king said, "Who is in court?" Now Haman had just entered the outer court by the king's palace in order to speak to the king about hanging Mordecai on the gallows which he had prepared for him. The king's servant said to him, "Behold, Mordecai is standing in the court." And the king said, "Let him come in." So Haman came in, and the king said to him, "What is to be done for the man whom the king desires to honor?" And Haman said to himself, Who would have the king's desire to honor more than me?" Then Haman said to the king, "For the man whom the king desires to honor, let him bring a royal robe which the king has worn, and the horse which the king has ridden, and whom the head of the royal crown be placed. Let the robe and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble princes, and let him array the man whom the king desires to honor, and lead him on horseback through the city square, and proclaim before him, 'Thus it shall be done to the man whom the king desires to honor.'" Then the king said to Haman, "Take quickly the robes and the horse as you have said, and do so for Mordecai the Jew, who is sitting at the king's gate. Do not fall short of anything for all that you said." So Haman took the robe and the horse and arrayed Mordecai, and led him on horseback throughout the city square, and proclaimed before him, "Thus it shall be done to the man whom the king desires to honor." Then Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman hurried home, mourning, with his head covered. Haman recounted to Zeresh, his wife, and to all his friends everything that had happened to him. Then the wise men and Zeresh, his wife, said to him, "If Mordecai, for whom you began to fall, is of Jewish origin, you will not overcome him, but will surely fall before him." While they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hastily brought Haman to the banquet which Esther had prepared. Now the king and Haman came to drink wine with Esther the queen. And the king said to Esther on the second day, also to drink their wine of the banquet, "What is your pardon, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you. And what is your request, even to half the kingdom? It shall be done." Then Queen Esther replied, "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given to me as my petition, and my people as my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. Now if we had only been sold as slaves, men and women, I would have remained silent, for to trouble would not to commiserate with the annoyance to the king." Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther, "Who is he, and where is he, who would presume to do this?" Esther said, "A foe, an enemy, is the wicked Haman." Then Haman became terrified before the king and the queen, and the king arose in his anger from drinking wine and went into the palace garden. But Haman stayed to beg for his life from Queen Esther, for he saw the harm that had been determined against him by the king. Now when the king returned from the palace garden into the place where they were drinking wine, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was, and the king said, "Will he even assault the queen with me in the house?" As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Then Harbanoah, one of the eunuchs who were before the king, said, "Behold, the gallows stand at Haman's house, 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke on behalf of the king." And the king said, "Hang him on it." So they hanged Haman on the gallows which he had prepared for Mordecai. And the king's anger subsided. All the things that just happened to happen at the right time. But the story's not done yet, because we need to see Act 4, the triumph of the nation of priests. The triumph of the nation of priests. On that day, King Ahasuerus gave the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, to Queen Esther, and Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had disclosed what he was to her. The king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. Then Esther spoke to the king, fell at his feet, wept, and implored him to avert the evil scheme of Haman, the Agagite, and his plot which he had devised against the Jews. For the king extended the scepter to Esther. So Esther arose and stood before the king. Then she said, "If it pleases the king, and I have found favor before him, and the matter seems proper to the king, and I am pleasing in his sight, let it be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews who are in the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the calamity which befall my people, and how can I endure to see the destruction of my kindred?" So King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and to Mordecai, the Jew, "Behold, I give you the house of Haman to Esther, and to him they have hanged on the gallows because he stretched out his hands against the Jews. Now, you write to the Jews as you see fit in the king's name, and seal it with the king's signet ring. For the decree which was written in the name of the king and sealed with the king's signet ring may not be revoked." So the king's scribe were called at the time of the 3rd month, that is the month Sivan, and the 23rd month. And it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded the Jews, the satraps, the governors, the princes, and the provinces which extended from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces, to every province according to its script, to every people according to its language, as to the Jews according to their script and their language. And he wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus, and sealed it with the king's signet ring, and sent letters by couriers and horses, riding on steeds sired by the royal stud. In them the king granted the Jews, who were in each and every city, the right to assemble and defend their lives, to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate the entire army of any people or province which might attack them, including children and women, and to plunder their spoil. And on the day, in all the provinces that King Ahasuerus, the 13th day of the 12th month, that is the month of Adar, a copy of the edict to be issued as law in each and every province was published to all the peoples, so the Jews would be ready for this day to avenge themselves on their enemies. The couriers, hastened and impelled by the king's command, went out, riding on the royal steeds, and the decree was given out to all the citadel in Susa. Then Mordecai went out in the presence of the king, in royal robes of blue and white, with a large crown of gold and a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Susa shouted and rejoiced, for the Jews there were light and gladness and joy and honor. In each and every province and in each and every city, wherever the king's commandment and his decrees arrived, there was gladness and joys for the Jews, a feast and a holiday, and many among the peoples of the land became Jews, for the dread of the Jews had fallen on them. Now in the 12th month, that is the month of Adar, on the 13th day when the king's command and edict was about to be executed, on the day when the enemies of the Jews hoped to gain mastery over them, it was turned to the contrary. So the Jews themselves gave the mastery over those who hated them. The Jews assembled in their cities throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus to lay hands on those who sought to harm them. And no one could stand before them, for the dread of them had fallen on all the peoples. Even the princes of the provinces, the satraps, the governors, and those who were doing the king's business assisted the Jews, because the dread of Mordecai had fallen on them. Indeed, Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame spread through all the provinces. For the man Mordecai became greater and greater. Thus the Jews struck all the enemies with the sword, killing and destroying, and they did what they pleased to those who hated them. At the citadel of Susa, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. At Parshathada, at Dalphon, at Aphtha, at Porthatha, Adelia, Ardithea, Pramathia, Arthasai, Ardai, Vizatha, the 10 sons of Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Jews' enemy, but they did not lay hands on the plunder. On that day, the number of those who were killed at the citadel to Susa was reported to the king, and the king said to Queen Esther, "The Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men, and the 10 sons of Haman at the citadel of Susa. What have they done in the rest of the king provinces? Now, what is your petition? It shall be granted to you. And what is your further request? It shall be done." Then Queen Esther said, "If it pleases the king, let tomorrow also be granted to the Jews who are in Susa to do according to the edict of today, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the gallows." So the king's command that it be done so, and an edict was issued in Susa, and Haman's 10 sons were hanged. The Jews who were in Susa assembled on the 14th day in the month of Adar and killed 300 men in Susa, but they did not lay a hand on the plunder. Final part, Act 5. Mordecai's success is for the purpose of blessing others. Notice how the book ends. Now the rest of the Jews who were in the king's provinces assembled to defend their lives and rid themselves of their enemies, killing 75,000 of those who hated them, but they did not lay a hand on the plunder. This was done on the 13th day of the month of Adar. On the 14th day they rested, and they made it in the day of feasting and rejoicing. But the men who were in Susa assembled on the 13th day and the 14th of the same month, and they rested on the 15th day, and they made it a day of feasting and rejoicing. Therefore the Jews of the rural places who lived in the royal towns made the 14th day of the month of Adar a holiday for rejoicing and feasting, and sent portions of food to no one other. Then Mordecai reported these events, and he sent letters to all the Jews who were in the province of King Ahasuerus, both near and far, obliging them to celebrate the 14th day of the month of Adar and the 15th day of the same month annually, because on those days the Jews rid themselves of their enemies, and it was a month which had turned for them from sorrow into gladness, from mourning into a holiday, that they should make them days of feasting and rejoicing, and send portions of food to one another and gifts to the poor. Thus the Jews undertook what they had started to do, what Mordecai had written to them. For Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the adversary of the Jews, had schemed against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast pur, that is, the lot, to disturb them and destroy them. But when it came to the king's attention, he commanded by letter the wicked scheme which he had devised against the Jews should return on his own head, and that he and his son should be hanged in the gallows. Therefore, they are called these days Purim, after the name Pur. And because of the instruction of this letter, both what they had seen in the regard and what had happened to them, the Jews established and made a custom for themselves and their descendants, and all those who allied with themselves with them, so that they would not fail to celebrate these 2 days according to their regulation and according to their appointed time annually. So these days were remembered and celebrated throughout every generation, every family, every province, every city. These days of Purim were not to fail among the Jews or make memory fade from their descendants. Then Queen Esther, daughter of Abihail, with Mordecai, the Jew, wrote with 430 to confirm the second letter of Purim. He sent letters to all Jews, to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus, namely words of peace and truth, to establish these days of Purim at their appointed times, just as Mordecai, the Jew, and Queen Esther had established for them, and just as they had established for themselves and for their descendants, with instructions for their time and fasting and their lamentation. The command of Esther established these customs for Purim, and it was written in the book. Now King Ahasuerus laid a tribute on the land and on the coastland of the sea, and all the commandments of his authority and strength, and the full account of the greatness of Mordecai, to which the king advanced him. For are they not written in the book of Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai, the Jew, was second only to King Ahasuerus, great among the Jews and in favor with many kingsmen, one who sought the good of his people and who spoke for the welfare of his whole nation.